One of my favorite things to do in the summer is to sit outside on my porch or a patio, and I love to make my own decorations to enjoy out there. Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Jess, and I love to make home decor on a budget, and if you do too, then let's get started. I saw this really cute planter on the Target website, and I really liked how it had the face on it and the cute little design on the bottom, and I knew I wanted to try to recreate it for myself. I went to the Dollar Tree and I grabbed one of their bowls. They have these in all different colors and patterns, and a little glass also that fit well on the bottom of the bowl. I started by removing the stickers off of both pieces, and I used some E6000 to glue the two pieces together because I knew this was going to sit outside and I wasn't sure if hot glue would do the trick in this case. So once I had all the E6000 on and I stuck the two pieces together, I let it set overnight to make sure that that glue was really set up. I don't spray paint that often, but I thought I would try to use some spray paint with this project, and I didn't do so good. I guess because I just don't do it that often. There was some runs in the paint and it just didn't look nice. So I decided to keep the project the way it was, and I just took my sanding block over it a little to make sure that those raised edges were more smooth, and then I went in with two colors of chalk paint. I mixed together the plaster color and the ocean color by Waverly, and I did give this 2 coats of that paint mixture, which was pretty close to the spray paint color, and it turned out really well in the end. I decided to use my Cricut to make a decal for the face for my planter. If you're really good at hand drawing, I think that this would be an easy way to show off those skills, but I did not feel confident in my face drawing skills, so I relied on my Cricut. And because of the shape of the bowl, because it was rounded in so many places, I just felt it was easier if I cut the face apart before I stuck it down on the bowl. And since it is chalk paint on the surface, the decal stuck really well to the chalk paint. The design on the original piece that I found on Target just had polka dots on the bottom, but I decided to change mine up a little. I went in with the plaster color and a smaller paintbrush, and I just started by drawing lines down vertically around the whole collar area of the planter. And because this is such a fun, quirky piece, I wasn't worried that my lines were uneven. I think that kind of just added to the eclecticness of something like this. So don't get too stressed out when you're doing things like this. They don't always have to be perfect. I think it adds a lot of character whenever there's a little flaw here and there in some of the lines that you're doing. After the white lines had dried on my planter, I went back in with the celery color, also by Waverly, and I'm using a very flat brush for this, and I'm just doing diagonal dashes in between each set of the white lines. And again, don't worry if this isn't too perfect, but if this is something that stresses you out, I think you could easily cut out lines and polka dots and anything else, any other kind of design you want to do on a Cricut, or you could use painter's tape and just paint or tape off the areas that you want to paint the lines in to get a nice crisp line. But like I mentioned before, I think this is such a quirky little piece that I actually kind of liked that the lines were a little uneven. To finish off my planter, I added just 1 square of floral foam to the center of the bowl. I tucked some newspapers around it just to fill in the gaps, and then I added some decorative rocks to the top, and I just tucked in 1 succulent. A great great way to add a pop of color to your front porch or patio is to use some really colorful planters, and they always have such a great selection at the Dollar Tree. And the planters are nice too because they're easy to add a little bit of embellishment to make over. I grabbed a few of these planters that just have the ridged lines on it, and I picked one out in blue because that matches a lot of my furniture on my porch, and I wanted to add some texture to the outside. And for this project, you definitely need some kind of finger protector because you'll see in the next step it's going to be really easy to burn your fingers if you don't have these. And they do have these at the Dollar Tree as well. For the design I had in mind for this pot, I wanted to create loops out of jute twine and then form them into a figure 8. So I started by measuring how long of a piece of jute I would need to make the loop on my planter, and in this case it was about 10.5 inches. Now that I have my finger protectors on, I took that 10.5 inch length of jute and I added some hot glue to one end, and then I rolled it in between my fingers. And that's why I said you really need those finger protectors, because you would definitely burn your fingers otherwise. And that forms a continuous loop out of the jute cord. You won't see any knots. And then once I twist it in the center, it forms that figure 8. So I just continued to cut lengths of jute cord that were about 10.5 inches, and I kept gluing them and making a figure 8. And I'm showing you here, I started out with a thinner jute cord and then I switched to a thicker one, and I'm doing the same technique. It worked the same whether it was the thinner one or the thicker one. And in the end, I actually made all of my loops out of the thicker jute cord. I just preferred the look of the thickness of the bigger one rather than the thinner jute cord. Once I had enough loops cut to fit around my planter, I picked one of the lines on this planter just to use as my guide, and I started by hot gluing the loop on that line, and then I crossed it in the center to make that figure 8, and then you can see where it brought it up to another one of the lines, and then I hot glued it down on the other line. And this again is where these finger protectors come in handy, because then I could just use my fingers to hold it in place rather than getting out my spatula. So I just continued gluing my jute cord. I probably spaced these out about an inch, inch and a half around the entire pot. And like I said, I would glue the bottom on and I'd give it one twist to form that figure 8, and then I'd glue on the top. To give this planter a more finished look, I took some of this burlap trim that I had at my stash. I think I might have got this at Michael's, and I just hot glued it around the top and the bottom of each of the figure 8s. And then that way, that kind of hid the fact that some of the figure 8s were a little longer than others, and it also covered up any of the excess hot glue that might have seeped out from underneath those loops. And because this was an actual planter with drainage holes, I actually did put a real plant in this one. I mentioned before in an earlier video that I don't have much of a green thumb, and the only plant that I have managed to keep alive in my house is an aloe plant, and it actually did need repotted. It had some little babies that needed a new home. So I took one of the babies and I planted it in this planter. If you like these planters so far, please give this video a big thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed to my channel if you haven't already. If you are on social media, I am on Instagram at GlueLaLa, so you can follow me over there as well. Alright, let's get into the last project. I always try to find a way to reuse glass jars. I believe this one was a spaghetti sauce jar, so I wanted to turn it into a planter that I could tuck some fake plants in. I grabbed a big pack of barbecue skewers. These ones came from Hobby Lobby. They were on a really good sale the one day that I was there, and they're a little thicker than the ones you can find at the Dollar Tree, but I think the ones from the Dollar Tree would work just as well. Because this jar is slightly rounded on the bottom, I made sure that as I was gluing these skewers on, I was adding the hot glue to the edge that was sticking out. It's kind of hard to see from this angle, but where I'm putting the glue is the widest part of the bottom of the jar. It kind of tapers in underneath there, and I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of glue between the jar and the skewers. Now, I'm not sure why I did it this way, but I did not cut my skewers first. And after I was done, I really wished I would have. So if you decide to make this, make sure you measure the length that you need your skewers and you cut them all first, because it will just make this a lot easier. As I'm gluing these down, I am trying to make sure that the bottoms are lined up, and after I had so many glued down, I would stand it upright just to see if all of the skewers were about the same length. I mean, if they were a little off, it's okay. You know, these handmade projects, they look cute, I think, when they're just slightly off, when they don't look so manufactured. But like I said, I really wished I would have cut these skewers first, because it was a little rough at the end. I still made it work, you'll see in the end, but definitely do as I say, not as I do, and cut your skewers first. To add a little more stability to these skewers, I'm just using some clear tape and I'm wrapping it around the bottom. That's also going to help to smooth out the edges a little and make sure that I'll have something to grip onto whenever I start gluing down my jute cord. So now I'm going to take my thicker jute cord and I'm going to start at the bottom, just slightly above the edge of the skewer sticks. And I did make sure that the whole first wrap of the jute cord was glued down. So you can see, like, I would glue a little bit down, a couple inches, and then I'd lay the cord on top of it. And once I had one full wrap around the entire jar, then I only added hot glue as I needed it. And I just kept winding the jute cord up till I had all of that tape covered. And it probably measured maybe like an inch, inch and a quarter. I just like the thickness of it. But you can wrap it up as far as you prefer. That's just what I liked. And here I am going in with my wire cutters, now cutting down my skewer sticks. Like I said, this wasn't very hard to do. It was, you know, the stability that I had on the bottom from the glue and the tape and then the jute, it actually made it pretty easy to cut these down. And I zoomed in so you could see here. What I was doing was I was kind of taking the previous one that I had cut and butting it up against my wire cutters so that whenever I snipped the next one, it was pretty much the exact same length, but I still think it would have been easier if I just would have cut them first. So again, it can be done if you forget to cut your skewers. You can make this work if you forget to cut them, but it's a lot easier if you just do it first. The last thing I did on this jar was I wanted to finish it off the same way the bottom was. Because these skewers stuck out above the jar, I didn't have to worry so much. I didn't put the tape on there because there was nothing in between there, if that makes any sense. So I just did the same thing though. The very first wrap that I made with my jute cord, I made sure that I used the hot glue around the whole way until I had that first wrap in place. And then once the first row was in, I could just keep wrapping it down until it was about the same width as the bottom. And then for this jar, I just tucked in some faux greenery. Thanks for hanging out in the craft room with me today. Let me know in the comments how you like to decorate your porch or your patio. I left some videos on the screen that I think you might like. I hope you have a great week, and I'll talk to you in the next one.